The station was called Calvaro, which in the old Lethari language meant the quiet place between. It hung in dark space above a dead gray moon, placed exactly where three borders nearly touched but did not cross. That was why the Union had chosen it for the meeting. No flag claimed it too strongly. No empire could say the station belonged to them alone. It was neutral, careful, and important. For 12 straight days, every major channel in Union space had spoken about the same event. Humanity was coming. Schools paused classes to show old maps of Earth and the trade lanes near human territory. News speakers used words like historic, fragile, and unrepeatable. Priests gave sermons. Senators gave speeches. Military analysts smiled too much while promising everyone there was nothing to worry about. Island trusted none of those people. He was not a politician, not a soldier, and not someone important enough to stand at the main table. He was an archive specialist from the Lethari academic branch, assigned to the station because he was good at watching people and writing down what they revealed without meaning to. Officially, his task was simple. Observe the human science delegation. Record their habits. Study their language use. Provide a cultural summary for the Union record. It was quiet work. Normally, Island liked quiet work. He stood now behind the glass of Docking Bay 4 and watched the human ship approach. It was smaller than he expected. He had read the ship file twice already that morning. Civilian research transport. Medium range. Diplomatic permit granted. Scientific exchange vessel. No heavy weapons. No military crew on the manifest. Clean record. Clean ownership chain. Clean inspection results. Everything about the file was correct. And yet the ship moved wrong. Not damaged. Not clumsy. Not suspicious in any formal way. If someone asked him to explain what he meant, he would struggle. But it moved with a kind of control that did not match its stated purpose. The thrusters fired in tiny bursts, exact and clean. The angle of entry was perfect. The final drift toward the docking clamps was so smooth that the ship seemed to place itself into the station's hands. Island narrowed his eyes. That was not how visiting civilian captains usually docked. That was how people docked when mistakes were unacceptable. The clamps locked with a heavy metal sound. Air pressure stabilized. Green lights ran along the frame of the docking tunnel. Around him, station officials straightened their uniforms. The airlock opened. 9 humans came through. Their leader walked first. Her name was Dr. Mara Vance, listed as Chief Cultural Scientist and Delegation Head. She was tall for a human woman, with dark hair pulled back from her face and silver beginning to show near one temple. Her clothes were formal but not stiff. She moved with a quiet ease that made the people around her look over-rehearsed. Behind her came the others in pairs. A medical officer. 2 research aides. A language specialist. A systems technician. A cultural historian. A junior assistant with bright eyes and an easy smile. One person labeled on the manifest as equipment manager. And one more listed only as logistics support. Island focused on the logistics support officer. The man stepped into the docking bay and smiled politely at the welcoming committee. Then his eyes moved once across the room. Left door. Emergency hatch. Overhead maintenance ladder. 3 exits. He found them all in less than a second. Island felt a small, cold touch of interest at the back of his mind. He took out his notebook and wrote a single line. Logistics support identifies exits on entry. Habit, not curiosity. Then he closed the notebook again before anyone could notice. The welcoming exchange began. Station Director Pal gave the official speech first, full of phrases about mutual respect and shared learning. Dr. Vance listened without interruption, hands folded neatly in front of her. When it was her turn to answer, her voice was calm and warm. "Thank you for receiving us," she said. "We know first meetings are never simple. We're honored to begin here." It was a very good answer. Not too formal. Not too personal. Just enough softness to lower the room's tension. Island watched the others while everyone else watched her. The junior assistant, whose name tag read Jonah Vale, was smiling at the nervous docking clerk as if they were already friends. The medic had quietly shifted half a step to the side so she could see everyone in the receiving line. The equipment manager carried 2 hard cases, one in each hand, but his posture remained balanced in a way Island had seen before only in trained rescue crews and security staff. Not soldiers, he told himself. Maybe not soldiers. But not careless people either. The first official session took place in the station's diplomatic chamber 2 hours later. The chamber had been redesigned for the meeting. Old banners had been removed. Neutral wall colors had replaced the Union blue. Chairs were adjusted for different body shapes. Translation nodes hung in the air above the long table, softly glowing as they processed speech in real time. Island sat in the second row behind the Union representatives with his notebook open on his lap. The first 20 minutes were exactly what they were supposed to be. Titles, goals, research interests, cultural respect, shared curiosity, future cooperation. Then Jonah, the smiling junior assistant, reached under the table and pulled out 3 wrapped boxes. That was not on the schedule. Several Union delegates glanced toward Director Pell. Pell tried not to show surprise and failed. Jonah looked toward Dr. Vance. She gave him the smallest nod. He placed the boxes on the table with almost childlike care. "We brought gifts," he said. "We weren't sure what would be proper, so we chose things from home." For a moment nobody moved. Then Pell cleared his throat. "That is unexpectedly kind." Jonah grinned. "That's fair." Soft laughter moved through the room. Pell opened the first gift. Inside was a carved figure made of dark wood, polished smooth by careful hands. It showed a tall animal with long legs and an impossibly long neck. "What is this creature?" one of the delegates asked. "A giraffe," Jonah said at once. "From Earth. They eat leaves from very tall trees. They look a little foolish, but in a good way." Even Island smiled at that. The second gift was a small music box made of silver metal and pale wood. The third was a sealed case of spices from Earth, packed with detailed chemical safety notes for Union biologists and kitchen staff. Thoughtful. Precise. Personal without being risky. Island wrote. Gift choices warm, careful, well-researched. Meant to build trust without pressure. Then after a pause he added. Effective. The next 2 days passed in a way he had not expected. The humans were easy to be around. Not performative. Not overly eager. Just warm. Jonah remembered names after hearing them once. The medic, Dr. Elian Ross, asked smart questions that made even shy station staff want to answer. The language specialist laughed at translation mistakes instead of getting embarrassed by them. The systems technician helped one of the station interns repair a broken display pad during a lunch break and never mentioned it again. They spent time with workers, not only officials. They ate common station food without complaint. They asked about Lethari poetry, narrow wind instruments, and the old moon ruins below the station. They did not act like a major new power stepping onto the stage. They acted like guests who wanted the visit to go well. That, more than anything, unsettled Island. On the third day, he was in the lower research lounge reviewing translated human archive notes when Jonah appeared in the doorway carrying a flat heat container. "We made too much," Jonah said. "Would you like some?" Island looked up. "You are asking an archive specialist to ignore station routine and eat visitor food in the middle of his work cycle." Jonah considered that. "Yes. That is improper." "Yes." Island looked at the container. Warm steam rose faintly when Jonah cracked the lid open. It smelled excellent. "Yes," Island said. Jonah smiled in easy victory and sat across from him. The meal was simple, some kind of grain dish mixed with vegetables and a rich sauce Island could not identify. It was stronger than Lethari food, but not unpleasantly so. Very quickly he realized he was eating faster than dignity allowed. Jonah noticed and politely pretended not to. Instead he started talking about the giraffe carving. His uncle had made it by hand. The neck had been difficult. The wood had split twice before the final version. Apparently his uncle had complained for 3 weeks about impossible anatomy. Island gave a short laugh despite himself. By the end of the meal, he knew far more about giraffes than he had ever expected to know. They were gentle. They were tall. Their hearts were powerful. Humans found them beautiful in a way Jonah admitted was hard to explain clearly. That line stayed with Island after Jonah left. Humans found beauty in strange things and carried those things across stars to give to strangers. That mattered. And yet, later that same day, the station ran its monthly emergency pressure drill. The alarm tone sounded through the diplomatic hall, sharp and mechanical. Lights changed from white to amber. A recorded voice instructed non-essential personnel to move to safe positions until the drill ended. The Union side reacted as people usually did. One junior aide flinched hard enough to drop a tablet. Another stood too quickly and hit the table. Director Pell remained composed, but Island saw the fast pulse flash under the skin of his throat. Then Island looked at the humans. Every one of them moved at once. No words. No confusion. No visible signal. Dr. Ross shifted toward the most fragile people in the room. The systems technician angled toward the wall console. The equipment manager took one step that placed him between the table and the main entrance. Jonah moved near the two youngest delegates as naturally as if he had always been meant to stand there. Dr. Mara Vance did not move at all. That was what held Island. Her hands rested on the table. Still. Not stiff. Not forced. Just still. The alarm lasted 30 seconds. The humans returned to their seats as smoothly as they had moved out of them. Around the room, people laughed softly from leftover tension. Someone made a joke about station timing. The meeting resumed. Island did not hear a word of it. His eyes stayed on Dr. Vance's hands. He had spent years studying first meetings, stress signs, and cross-species behavior. Startle responses were difficult to hide. Even trained diplomats showed small betrayals: finger tension, breath shift, shoulder movement, changes around the eyes. He had seen none of that. That night in his quarters, he opened his notebook and wrote carefully. Pressure drill, day 3. Human group repositioned instantly, silently, with apparent role separation already understood. Response looked practiced. He paused, then added. Dr. Mara Vance showed no visible stress reaction at all. Possible extreme self-control. Possible training beyond diplomatic needs. He looked at the sentence for a long time. Then he turned to a fresh page and wrote one more line. Question: what kind of scholars prepare like that? Outside his narrow room window, the stars remained cold and still. Somewhere beyond them, Earth turned under its own clouds and oceans, carrying a species the Union still believed it had almost understood. Island closed the notebook. He was supposed to be studying friendly visitors. Instead, for the first time since the humans had arrived, he felt the shape of a different possibility beginning to form. They were kind. He believed that. They were open. He believed that too. But as he sat in the quiet of his room and replayed the drill in his mind, one thought refused to leave him. Peaceful was not the same thing as harmless. The next morning, Island told himself he was only doing routine archive work. That was not true, and he knew it. He arrived early to the station records room before the main corridors filled with voices. The archive chamber was quiet at that hour, lit by soft wall strips and the pale glow of research screens. Usually he liked the room because it asked nothing from him. It held old facts, recorded statements, sealed histories, and dead arguments. Facts stayed where you left them. That was comforting. This morning, nothing felt comforting. He sat down, opened his terminal, and entered the Human Cultural Database. At first he searched the harmless things. Rituals. Family structures. Educational models. Mourning customs. Food traditions. Music. He had already read summaries, but now he read more deeply. He wanted context. He wanted to understand why the humans on Calvaro felt so warm and so careful at the same time. For almost an hour, the archive gave him exactly what any hopeful diplomat would want to see. Family loyalty. Long memory. Humor under pressure. A habit of turning survival into story. Strong social bonding even across large populations. Deep attachment to home symbols. Strange but beautiful traditions of carrying old songs forward through centuries. Then he reached the war records. He had not searched for them directly. The archive itself led him there, because war touched almost every part of human history. He sat back slowly. There were too many entries. Not one era. Not one collapse. Not one ancient shame they had moved beyond. War appeared again and again across the entire historical line, in different languages, different borders, different governments, different weapons, different moral reasons, and sometimes with no moral reason at all except fear, hunger, pride, or revenge. Island had studied violent species before. The Union was not built from innocence. But most civilizations treated war like a fire in the house. It happened. It scarred everything. Then people spent generations trying to make sure it did not happen again. Humanity did something more difficult. They remembered it. Not only as warning, not only as grief. They recorded it, studied it, argued about it, built museums around it, wrote songs about it, and passed its lessons forward. Some lessons were warnings. Some were pride. Some were sorrow. Some were strategy. They did not forget what violence required. That was different. He opened the section on emergency training. Then civilian disaster response. Then military doctrine. Then rescue and evacuation procedure. Halfway through the third file, he stopped reading and stared at the screen without seeing it. The pressure drill from yesterday replayed in his memory. The silent movement. The assigned positions. The way Jonah had reached the vulnerable delegates first. The way Dr. Ross had shifted toward the most likely casualty area before anyone else even stood up. They had not reacted like nervous visitors. They had reacted like trained people falling into a known pattern. Island opened his notebook. Humans maintain layers of readiness even in peaceful operations. Training appears normal to them, not exceptional. He hesitated, then added, possibility. Delegation includes personnel trained for crisis response beyond declared roles. He did not like writing that sentence. He liked the humans. That was part of the problem. Later that afternoon, the main delegation gathered again in the diplomatic hall. This time the topic was academic access, research exchange, and protected survey zones around nearby dead systems. It should have been boring. It was on the surface. Director Pell was arguing gently with Dr. Mara Vance over archive access standards. Two trade analysts on the union side were discussing legal wording that nobody except analysts would ever enjoy. Jonah sat half a step behind Mara with a data slate on his knee, listening with the casual interest of someone who seemed impossible to upset. And still Island kept noticing details. When staff entered the room with refreshment trays, the equipment manager looked up before anyone else. When an overhead vent rattled from a pressure shift 3 corridors away, Dr. Ross's attention moved toward the ceiling for less than a second. When one of the junior aides accidentally blocked the side passage while carrying too many pads, the logistics officer very gently suggested a clearer line of movement and then stepped back like he had said nothing important. Every piece was small. Together they were not small. That evening Jonah found him again, this time in the lower observatory. The young human held 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee, not station brew. The smell reached Island before Jonah spoke. I was told, Jonah said, that serious researchers work better when bribed. Island looked at the cup. You are attempting influence. Yes. With stimulants. Yes. Island accepted the coffee. This is deeply unethical. That's why it works. They stood side by side at the observatory glass. Below them, the dead moon hung pale and silent. Beyond it, dark space opened like an unwritten thought. For a while they talked about nothing important. Jonah asked about Lethari childhood games. Island asked whether all Earth coffee tasted this aggressive. Jonah laughed and explained that this batch came from a region on Earth where people apparently believed fear and alertness were the same thing. Then Jonah pointed toward the moon below. Do you ever go down there? He asked. Rarely. Why? There is nothing there. Jonah tilted his head slightly. That is often where people hide interesting things. Island turned and looked at him. Jonah was still smiling. Harmless on the surface. But the sentence stayed in the air between them for a moment longer than it should have. Island said carefully, You say that as if you have experience. Jonah took a slow sip of coffee. Human history encourages preparation. The answer was light. Too light. Island let it pass, but only outwardly. That night the station's long-range sensor grid reported a faint mass reading beyond the far dark line of the outer approach lane. The signal appeared for 4 seconds. Then it vanished. The junior technician on duty logged it as drift interference and moved on. Island learned about it the next morning only because he was in the system's archive reviewing unrelated station notes and saw the low-priority report. He opened it out of habit, read the numbers, and felt the cold touch at the back of his mind return. The mass reading was not small. He checked the angle. Deep dark approach. Minimal traffic. Bad sensor geometry. He checked the timestamp. Night cycle. He checked whether the reading repeated. It had not. He pulled the station map and looked at the blind regions around Calvaro. Then he sat very still. The technical explanation might be correct. Drift interference happened. Ghost readings happened. Deep space arrays were imperfect. And yet, he copied the report reference into his notebook. By the 6th day, he had a private list. Perfect docking. Exits counted on entry. Pressure drill response. No visible stress from Mara Vance. Hidden awareness of station flow patterns. Human emergency training far beyond diplomatic need. Now unexplained outer-range mass reading. He did not yet know what the list meant. He only knew lists like that rarely stayed meaningless for long. The second strange sensor event happened during evening meal rotation. This time 2 arrays caught it. Again the reading appeared at extreme range. Again it showed mass far larger than random debris. Again it vanished before a full lock could be established. The report went to station analysis. Station analysis had a backlog. Nobody panicked. Nobody changed schedule. The station continued running as if history had not already started leaning toward it. That same evening, the humans brought food to the research lounge. Not ceremonial food. Not formal offerings. Just warm meal containers and folded eating tools and the simple statement from Dr. Ross that they had made too much again and waste was offensive to several human grandmothers, which apparently settled the matter. Island found himself sitting across from Mara Vance while Jonah explained a spiced grain dish to a fascinated nutrition officer. Mara ate slowly and listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, her questions were exact without feeling intrusive. She asked Island about Lethari memory practice. How did his people teach pattern retention? What kinds of detail were considered worth preserving? Which facts did his culture record formally, and which were entrusted to spoken tradition? At first it felt like intelligent conversation. Then Island realized how skillful the questions were. She was learning his species while making him feel interesting. That was a talent. And talents had uses. Your questions are very precise, Island said quietly. Mara looked at him over her cup. Is that a complaint? No. Good. There was a brief silence. Then she added, precision is a form of respect. It was an excellent answer. Island believed she meant it. He also believed she knew exactly how effective that sentence would be. Both things, he was slowly learning, could be true at once. The attack began the next day at 11:43 station time. There was no warning. One moment the diplomatic session was crawling through revised language on survey corridors and protected lanes. The next moment every communication channel on the station cut out. Not degraded. Not flickering. Gone. The translation lights dimmed to gray. The room stopped breathing. Then the hull groaned. The sound rolled through the structure like something huge dragging metal across bone. A second impact followed from farther down the station, harder this time. Somewhere in the commercial section, lights failed and emergency strips burst alive in red. The real alarm began a heartbeat later. Not the drill tone. A full emergency scream. Everything after that moved too fast for thought. Union delegates stood badly, collided with chairs, grabbed the wrong cases, turned toward the wrong exit. One junior academic froze where she was. Director Pell barked an order that nobody heard clearly because the alarm swallowed it. Island's own body reacted before his mind caught up. He was on his feet, one hand pulling the frozen academic by the wrist, the other reaching for the wall rail. And then he saw the humans. No panic. No confusion. No raised voices. They broke apart into motion like something practiced so many times it had sunk below thought. The systems technician went straight to the wall console. Dr. Ross already had her medical case open. The logistics officer moved toward the corridor not to escape, but to control flow. Jonah was gone for half a second, then visible again at the junction ahead, directing frightened station staff toward a side evacuation route that Island had never seen on any public map. Never seen. How did he know it existed? Mara Vance walked, not ran, through the middle of the chaos. She touched one terrified delegate on the shoulder, pointed him toward the safe corridor, and never once raised her voice. The calm around her was unnatural. Not empty. Not cold. Controlled. Island dragged the frozen academic forward. Behind him, another impact shook dust from the upper frame. Somewhere beyond the diplomatic wing, weapons fire cracked through the station. Orders, he thought. The word hit him with icy clarity. Orders. The emergency shelter filled in less than 7 minutes. Dozens of station staff. Delegates. Researchers. Maintenance crew. Frightened, breathing hard, talking too fast. The internal systems sputtered back online, but the external network remained dead. Reports came in broken pieces. Unknown assault group. Outer commercial breach. Hostile entry teams. No Union defense ships close enough to help. Then the name arrived. Threx Combine. A raider power. Midsize. Aggressive. Famous for hitting soft targets hard and fast before larger fleets could respond. The kind of enemy that looked for places exactly like Calvaro. Important enough to matter, weak enough to break. Panic moved through the shelter in a physical wave. Island counted the humans. 1, 2, 3. All 9 were there. All 9. He had no idea how. He was still trying to understand that when noise rose in the corridor outside. Metal impact. A shouted order in a language he did not know. Then silence. Then movement too fast to follow. From the shelter doorway, with 20 others half hidden behind the inner wall, Island saw 2 humans in the corridor. Unarmed as far as he could tell. Opposite them, 4 armored Threx boarders rushed the choke point with shock batons and compact rifles. The next 4 seconds did not fit cleanly into memory. A turn. A body hitting the wall. One rifle spinning loose. Someone dropping hard. A sharp cry cut short. Jonah low and fast under a swing that should have broken his skull. Another human, Island barely registered who, driving an attacker sideways into the corridor frame with brutal precision. Then it was over. 4 armored boarders were down. Jonah stood breathing hard but steady, one sleeve torn near the shoulder. The other human wiped blood from a split lip and looked down the corridor as if checking whether more cleanup would be required. Island could not make the numbers work. Not physically. Not mentally. Not with everything he thought he understood about civilian delegates. Behind him in the shelter, fear became a new thing. Not less fear. Changed fear. Because now there was something else in the room with it. Understanding. Slow, cold, incomplete understanding. The station commander's voice finally came back over the internal line. Threx ships had formed attack position outside the station. Shields were damaged and holding at partial strength. No Union relief vessels were in immediate range. The enemy had sent a surrender demand window and was preparing heavier engagement. The shelter went nearly silent. Island looked toward Mara Vance. She stood near the forward display listening to something in her earpiece. Around her, station staff shook, whispered, prayed, or stared. Around her, the other humans waited. Not bravely. Not like frightened people pretending to be calm. They simply were calm. That was worse. Or perhaps better. Island no longer knew. Mara touched her earpiece once and lifted her eyes to the main display, where 12 enemy ships were spreading into firing position around Calvaro. The station seemed very small. The universe seemed very large. And in the middle of all that fear, the 9 humans looked like people who had just reached a point in a sequence they had expected all along. Island felt the truth before he had words for it. The humans were not hoping to survive what came next. They had already planned for it.
The surrender demand came through the damaged station speakers at 12:31. The voice was cold, flat, and certain of itself. This station will signal compliance within 60 seconds, the translated message said. Failure to comply will result in full structural engagement. The words rolled through the emergency shelter and settled like weight. No one in the room misunderstood them. Calvaro was not a war station. Its shields were built for debris, accidents, and the kind of small violence that sometimes followed border disputes. They were not built to survive a determined fleet attack. Everyone in the shelter knew that. The station commander knew it. Director Pell knew it. Island knew it. The Threx Combine knew it too. That was why the threat sounded so casual. On the forward display, 12 enemy ships held position in a wide attack ring around the station. They had chosen their geometry well. Even Island, who was not military, could see that much now. The ring blocked escape lanes. It created overlapping fire angles. It made the station look trapped. Several people in the shelter had begun counting the seconds aloud without realizing they were doing it. Others had gone quiet in a way that was worse. Director Pell stood near the command panel, his face pale and drawn. He was trying very hard to look like a person with options. Island looked at the humans. Nothing had changed in them. Jonah had found another cup of coffee from somewhere. Island did not know how. He was holding it in both hands now, watching the display as if the problem on the screen was difficult but not surprising. Dr. Ross had her medical case closed and ready at her feet. The logistics officer stood with one shoulder near the shelter entrance, not tense, just placed exactly where he could move fastest if needed. And Dr. Mara Vance stood in front of the display, with her hands at her sides. Still. The same stillness from the drill. The same stillness from every strange moment since the humans arrived. Island watched her profile and felt, very sharply, that he was looking at the answer to a question he had been asking himself for days. Not the full answer, only the shape of it. 30 seconds remained. The station commander spoke over the internal line, telling everyone to hold position. Her voice was under control, but barely. Somewhere behind Island, a junior researcher had begun whispering a prayer so softly the translation nodes could not catch the words. 20 seconds. Director Pell turned toward Mara at last. "Do you have any communication with your government?" he asked. Mara did not look away from the display. "Yes." Pell swallowed. "Can they help us?" She waited one heartbeat too long before replying. "We are handling it," she said. Pell stared at her. "We?" She did not answer that. 10 seconds. The shelter became so quiet that Island could hear the weak hum of damaged ventilation somewhere in the wall. He looked at the 12 Threx ships on the screen. He looked at the humans. He thought about the sensor anomalies, the vanished mass readings, the perfect docking, the exits, the drill, the corridor, the 4 armored boarders on the floor. He thought, not for the first time, "What are you?" The countdown reached 0. Nothing happened. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. The Threx did not fire. The station did not break apart. No new alarms began. The silence that followed was so strange that it hurt. Then the sensors updated. The display lagged for half a breath, processing new information. Numbers flashed in the side columns. Warning icons changed color. A low system's tone sounded once across the shelter. New contacts had appeared. Not at long range. Not approaching from outside the enemy ring. Already inside it. Island stepped forward without knowing he had moved. 6 ships. 6. They were already within close engagement distance of the Threx formation, positioned in the dark spaces between attack vectors where no one had expected anything to exist. They had not rushed in to save the station at the last possible second. They had been there before the countdown ended. Before the Threx completed their attack spread. Perhaps, Island realized with a sudden cold certainty, before the first breach in the commercial wing. Perhaps before the humans had ever docked. Director Pell made a sound under his breath that did not become a full word. Around the shelter, people stared in stunned silence as the sensor return sharpened. The first 5 ships resolved as heavy escort vessels. Large. Dense. Quietly armed in ways even Island could recognize now. They held their positions with the unnatural stability of ships whose crews were not improvising. Full active sensors lit along their profiles. They were not hiding anymore. They were showing themselves completely. One by one, the 5 escorts brightened into visibility. Not all at once. In sequence. A deliberate reveal. As if they wanted the Threx to understand each fact separately. Here is one ship. Now another. Now another. And another. And now the 5th. Island had just enough time to realize how carefully that must have been timed when the sixth contact resolved. For a moment, the station display seemed uncertain. The processing system checked the mass reading once. Then again. Then committed. The numbers that settled on the screen were enormous. Island felt his body go cold. He had seen figures like that before in the public military archives while searching old human records, historical files, retired classes, decommissioned warships from another era, huge vessels built at the edge of what older human industry could support. He had assumed those files were history. The ship that appeared now made history look like a lie told politely. It emerged from stealth slowly enough to feel intentional. The human flagship was not elegant. It was too large for elegance. It had the presence of geography. It did not slide into the middle of the Threx formation so much as become the center of it. Every enemy angle broke around it. Every attack line bent wrong the moment it appeared. The shelter display marked it with a simple identifier from a human channel. HGS Resolute Dawn. No one in the room spoke. The Threx commander sent a transmission on open broadcast. It came through this time without the earlier confidence. Identify those vessels. No one answered. Mara Vance stood with her hands at her sides and said nothing. Island looked at Jonah. Jonah looked back at the screen with a flat, focused expression of someone reading an expected weather report. The Threx commander transmitted again, faster this time, demanding identification, status, intent. Still no human answer. Then the Resolute Dawn fired. The first shot crossed the distance in a way that made distance almost meaningless. The second followed before the station display had fully resolved the first impact. The targets were not the nearest enemy ships, not the loudest threats, not the ones facing Calvaro directly. The human flagship struck the two ships anchoring the Threx formation's retreat lanes. Island understood the choice at once. Do not just hit the enemy. Shape what happens next. The two Threx ships vanished into light and debris. The attack ring broke immediately. Everything after that happened very fast and also with a terrible kind of clarity. The 5 escort ships moved first, cutting the enemy formation into smaller pieces before it could regroup. Their paths were exact. No wasted turns. No collision panic. No confused overlapping orders. They moved like parts of a design. The Threx returned fire, but too late and from the wrong angles. Their original formation had been built to kill a station, not survive an ambush from inside their own perimeter. Some tried to run. Some tried to tighten inward. 2 attempted a coordinated strike toward the flagship and were erased before they reached firing confidence. The Resolute Dawn did not move much. It did not need to. It sat in the center of the battle like a fact the Threx had failed to include in their calculations. The engagement lasted 9 minutes and 13 seconds. Island knew the exact number because the shelter clock sat in the corner of the display, and his eyes kept returning to it as if a clock could explain what he was seeing. At the end of 9 minutes and 13 seconds, the Threx combined no longer had an attack ring around Calvaro. They barely had a fleet. 3 ships were gone entirely. 4 were crippled. The rest were scattering in damaged withdrawal patterns, their discipline broken, and their confidence destroyed. The human escorts did not chase recklessly. They pushed exactly far enough to make the retreat final, then returned to controlled holding positions around the station. The battle ended not with glory, but with certainty. That was somehow more frightening and more comforting. All around Island, the shelter began to breathe again. Relief moved through the room as a sound before it became words. Someone laughed once, badly, on the edge of tears. A station technician sat down on the floor because his legs had stopped listening to him. Director Pell put both hands on the command panel and lowered his head for 1 full second before lifting it again and pretending he had not done that. Mara Vance finally moved. She touched her earpiece once and spoke quietly into a private channel. Her words were too soft for Island to hear. Whatever answer came back seemed to satisfy her. She turned to Director Pell. "The station is secure for the moment," she said. "Our vessels will hold position until your command staff completes structural and tactical review." "Our vessels?" Pell looked at her as if language itself had become difficult. "You had those ships waiting." Mara met his eyes. We came prepared to protect the delegation. That was true. Island knew at once it was also not the whole truth. He left the shelter only when movement in the corridors became orderly again. Hours later, after emergency teams confirmed no second boarding attempt was underway and internal systems stabilized, he found an empty terminal room on the research level and sat down in front of a screen. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He opened the public crew feed access for affiliated vessels. It was a transparency protocol the humans themselves had granted as part of the exchange package. Non-sensitive activity only. General crew status. Damage review. Standard internal channels. He selected one of the escort ships first. He did not know what he expected to see. Celebration, perhaps. Released fear. The wild emotional crash that followed survival. He saw none of that. The crew were working. Methodical.
Calm. Precise. System checks.
Position reports. Post-engagement logs. Damage review. Though the ship had barely taken any visible damage at all. A pair of technicians argued mildly over a sensor sweep setting with the energy of people finishing normal shift tasks. On another feed, a weapons officer removed his gloves, sat down, and opened a meal container. He was eating.
Eating.
Not trembling. Not laughing in relief. Not shaking out fear from his body. Just eating a hot meal while reviewing engagement records. Island switched to the flagship feed. More of the same. Not arrogance. Not excitement. Routine. That was the part that settled deepest into him. The human crews had not behaved like people who had survived impossible danger. They had behaved like people completing a planned response. This was not, from their point of view, a miracle. It was procedure. He leaned back from the screen and closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the wooden giraffe sitting under soft light in the diplomatic hall. He saw Jonah offering coffee in the observatory. He saw Dr. Ross asking warm, careful questions over shared food. He saw Mara Vance standing before the shelter display with her hands still at her sides while 12 enemy ships aimed at the station. All of it was real. That was what made it so difficult. The kindness was real. The gifts were real. The curiosity was real. And somewhere beyond the station hull, hidden in the dark before the first handshake had ever happened, 6 human warships had already been waiting. Both things were true. He sat with that for a long time. The station took 3 days to settle after the attack. Repairs began at once. Reports multiplied like insects. Union officials arrived by secure channel and then in person. Tactical analysts asked the wrong questions first. Politicians used the word gratitude because it was the safest word available. The Threx Combined sent a stiff and careful statement through intermediaries describing the incident as a regional misunderstanding. No one on Calvaro took that seriously. The human ships remained in place, while the station recovered. The escorts widened into a quiet protective pattern. The Resolute Dawn moved least of all, repositioning only enough to place itself between the station and the direction from which the Threx had come. Simple geometry. Simple message. Island slept properly for the first time in days. That fact troubled him. It should not have felt comforting to know an enormous hidden warship stood guard outside his station. It should have raised new fears, new moral questions, new uncertainty. It did raise those things. And still he slept. On the second evening after the attack, he found Jonah in the station canteen. The main dining hall was still damaged, so the smaller crew room had become the only place to eat. The lights were poor. Repair crews made noise in the corridor outside. The food was simple and not particularly well arranged. Jonah had already set 2 cups on a table. One for himself. One waiting. Island sat across from him. For a little while, neither of them mentioned the battle. They talked about small things first. The station coffee. The way Let Hari grain unexpectedly paired well with human spice. Whether Jonah's uncle would ever stop complaining about carving giraffe necks. Then Island put his cup down. How long were they out there, he asked. Jonah did not pretend not to understand. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. Measuring. Finally he said, "Long enough." That is not an answer. It is the answer I can give. Island looked at him carefully. Were you ever in danger? Jonah smiled, but softly this time. Everyone is always in some danger. That is not what I asked. No, Jonah said. It isn't. The silence that followed was not hostile, only honest. At last Jonah leaned back slightly and folded his hands around his cup. We hoped this would stay a simple exchange mission, he said. We really did. Island believed him. That made the rest somehow larger. Later that night, in his office, Island began his final report. He opened the standard first contact assessment template. Name, assignment, observed delegation size, language notes, cultural markers, behavioral analysis. He filled each field slowly. He wrote about the gifts, the food, the warmth, the humor. He wrote that these things had been genuine and that any report failing to state this clearly would be incomplete. Then he wrote about the drill response, the emergency route knowledge, the compartmentalized readiness, the ability of the human delegation to present openness without revealing operational depth. He was careful with his wording there. Not deception. Not exactly. Something more difficult. A species able to be sincere without being exposed. He wrote for nearly 2 hours. When he finally reached the classification field at the top of the report, he stopped. The standard term for a document like this was simple. Emerging civilization assessment. That was the union phrase. It had been used for decades. Neutral. Administrative.
Ordinary.
Island stared at it. Then he deleted it. He sat for a moment with a blinking cursor. Then he typed 2 new words. Deliberate guardians. He read the phrase twice. It was not perfect, but it was true. Humanity, he thought, was not dangerous because it was cruel. Humanity was dangerous because it could offer peace honestly while remaining completely prepared for the failure of peace. That was different. That was new. That mattered. He saved the report. Outside, beyond the station hall, the Resolute Dawn held position in the dark with its running lights visible, small, ordinary points of brightness against a body built for catastrophic force. Not full battle lights. Not threat posture. Just the simple courtesy any ship used to say, I am here. In the diplomatic hall, the carved giraffe still stood under its display lamp. The wood grain followed the long neck exactly as the human craftsman had intended, as if the animal had always been hidden inside the wood and had only needed patient hands to reveal it. On the following evening, Island returned to the canteen. Jonah was already there. 2 cups waited on the table again. Island sat down. They spoke about ordinary things.
Food.
Repairs. Music. Jonah showed him the tune inside the little music box and explained where it came from. Island told him the station kitchen had used the Earth's spices too heavily on the first attempt and almost injured a senior analyst. Jonah laughed so hard, he had to put his cup down. The warmth was real. Island knew that now, with complete certainty. He also knew what had waited in the dark beyond the station while the humans smiled, shared food, and brought hand-carved gifts across the stars. Both truths sat at the same table.